Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew: Keith Johnson,
Greetings, all.
Alan Seiler,
Kapla.
and Veronica Dashel.
Hi.
And this is a pre-recorded show for you this week, so we're not live, so we can't see your comments. But we're recording this in advance because we're all going to be tied up getting ready for Dragon Con when this episode comes out. But we couldn't let this time pass because, I mean, it's very rare that we actually catch up with one of like the future episodes of Star Trek, you know? And I mean, this is one that for, I mean, more than 30 years now, I've been waiting for because the date is given right in the episode. And it's just a fantastic pair of episodes.
Yeah.
We're talking, of course, about Past Tense Part 1 and 2 from Deep Space Nine Season 3. And as the episode begins, early in the episode, they show the date, and it's August the 30th, August the 30th, 2024. I'm still thinking about the 90s.
Right.
And then it continues on into the first week of September. So it's basically as this episode comes out will be when the episode took place. So we thought it'd be a great time to just revisit Past Tense and just dive a little deeper into that pair of episodes. Because I think it's a pair of episodes that really stands the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So this is an interesting
Agreed.
one because as it was aired, it's a episode that takes place in the audience's future.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Star Trek is concerned, it takes place in the character's past.
Right.
And for us as current viewers, it is a present episode.
Right.
Or at least it
Past,
will be in a
present,
few
future.
days.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a unique situation, I feel like.
It
Yeah.
really is.
And there are things about it that we are not quite reached, but to the point of what Alan is saying, this is probably one of the more accurate quote unquote predictions from Star Trek
Mhm.
because, Charles, you were
Yeah.
saying that like if you look at the original series, the probe Nomad should have launched 30 years ago. Originally, Khan was in space, and we had what they used to call the Third World War. There's all this stuff that should have happened. There's Picard messed that up, but we're supposed to have a manned mission to Saturn coming right about now. None of that's happening, but this one is accurate in a lot of ways, and you don't have to squint too much to see the reality of what they were predicting going on right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's one of those social concerns that they had in the early 90s that hasn't improved in the last 30 years. That this is still just as topical as it was then. And really, I mean, when you talk about the sanctuary districts, there's these walled off areas where they're going to collect all the people who are homeless and all the people. And I'm sure they would have sold it to the population as being like, we're going to take care of them and give them a safe place. And
Right.
so that lets people vote for it. While even though in their mind, they're thinking like, oh, good, these people will be out of my way. I won't have homeless people coming up to me on the street anymore because they'll be in the sanctuary district. But it gives them an altruistic idea of like, well, this is for their own good. We're going to help them find jobs. We're going to give them a safe place to sleep. So I'm doing a good thing.
I mean, the name Sanctuary
Mm-hmm.
sounds so nice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think politicians could sell this idea right now and people would
Yeah.
support it.
Oh, 100% agreed.
Star
Yeah.
Trek fans,
And that's
if you
why I
like
feel
that,
like-
you guys are
Yeah.
crazy. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was,
Well, they
that was
kinda
four
sorta
people
had,
talking
'cause
at the
that-
same time.
Sorry.
Take
Now
turns,
too.
folks.
Yeah, because as we speak, and in our largest state, California, they have laws now that criminalize being homeless. And the governor of California, who is otherwise considered one of the biggest liberals in the country, is working on ways of criminalizing homeless people or the unhomed. And you can be arrested for it. And there's a huge concern because lots of legal judgments are increasingly saying that is okay to do. Criminalizing being homeless is a weird thing, but it is taking place as we speak right now in arguably one of our most liberal states. So it is a thing that's taking place.
And even outside of the law, I mean, you see things like they're re-engineering benches so that homeless people can't sleep on them. And they'll put like spiked floors on like under overhangs so that homeless people don't sleep under the overhangs and things like that. You know what I mean? Which is like directly targeting people who don't have somewhere to go.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Wow,
And
that's pretty intense.
working in a public library as I do, I see a lot of this on a daily basis. And
Yeah.
and these are people that the three things that they need more than anything is a place to eat, drink, and sleep.
Mhm.
And they try to do that in the library, and you cannot do that in the library. We don't allow food and drink in the library. You cannot sleep in the library. So they come for, use our public computers and just to like have a place to get out of the sun or the weather and read a book and things like that. And on that level, yeah, we do have a way of meeting those needs, but the basic stuff we just can't do.
Right.
And it's a it's a tough situation.
Mhm.
And and I
Absolutely.
work in a fairly affluent
Yeah.
community, and we
Mhm.
still have quite a bit of that. I'm not even talking about some of the branches down in the depths of Atlanta downtown, where there's a lot of homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tough situation.
Mm. Yeah. Well, let's dive a little bit more into the episode specifically because, one thing that I've learned, I didn't pick up on it when I was a kid. That the fact that Sisko and Bashir are picked up and Jadzia is not, and she's what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've heard Ira Stephen Bear talk about specifically was that it was a
Mhm.
deliberate choice that the two dark-skinned men are immediately picked up by the police
Absolutely.
and put in the sanctuary district, and then the pretty white lady
Right.
has a rich guy finds her and gives her everything she
Yep.
needs and access to a computer and takes her to parties. You know what I mean? That
Yep.
that wasn't happenstance. That was something they did as a deliberate choice. I see that more as an adult than I did when I was 13 or 14 when this came out. I didn't pick up on it at the time, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's something that's very powerful in the episode that just immediately upon arrival, they get very different receptions in 2024.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah,
so
because
interesting.
there's people's perceptions of what's scary, and to some people, a brown man is just scary. End of story. And an attractive woman, a white
Mm-hmm.
woman especially, is not, and that kind of dictates everything from there.
Mhm.
And what I think is really interesting about that is that watching Star Trek, and the kind of, my set of eyes watches Star Trek in a particular way. And you don't think about those things when you think about Star Trek, because in Star
Mhm.
Trek, you always get the sense of equality and,
Mhm.
Right.
and when so maybe the first time I saw it, I didn't really think about the fact that it was two persons of color that got picked up and one paler person,
Right.
prettier person
Mhm.
that did not, because you don't think about the Star Trek characters that way.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about it in 1990s terms, and you watch it with 1990s eyes, or you watch it with 2024 eyes, it looks very different than
Yeah.
maybe when you're watching it through the Star Trek lens.
Sure. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And a lot of these episodes I watched for the first time when I was quite young, because like I said, I was a young teen when these episodes were coming out. But I mean, even aside from the racism element of it, I do think there's some kind of commentary, whether it's deliberate or not, about women, about you find a woman asleep in an alley, passed out, and it's, oh my gosh, are you okay? Just because of violence against women. You know what I mean? So I think that it certainly works on a couple of different levels there. That just as a person, if you find this pretty lady asleep in an alley, it's like, oh my God, what has a man done to you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I
Right.
think there's a couple of different ways that it could be looked at as well.
And
Wow.
there's a lot of weird story, but I remember reading years ago about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, and he was extremely affluent, of course. He comes from a very rich family. And I remember they talked about one time he, for some reason, had to do something like take a chauffeur or a maid from his family home. And it was like the first time he'd ever gone into the tenements of New York. And he was stunned. And he himself had to confront that they must want to live this way. That initially came up in him, like people who live like that. The whole thing is they live that way because they must want to live that way, and you have to realize that nobody wants to live like that. I won't go into deep. I have had family who've been homeless. I've had friends who've been homeless, and I've been around homeless communities a lot in my life. And one of the things that will stun you sometimes about some homeless people, yes, we all have the stereotype of the psychotic, schizophrenic, dirty, smelly homeless person. I have known and been around homeless people who they may live in a box, but they sweep that box out every night. They may have one pair of clothes that are literally falling off of them, but they try to keep them clean. And they have a strange dignity that from outside you don't maybe realize they have. And frankly, you might not think they should have. You know, but I've seen homeless people, I've known homeless people with holes in their shoes, but they still say, hey, this is my stuff. Don't mess my stuff up. And their stuff may be a crate they stole from a grocery store. Right. You know, and it may be a blanket that is dirtier and darker than my skin. It's so dirty, but that's their blanket. And you have to learn that dignity comes in all kinds of strange ways. And sometimes you just have to give people dignity. And one thing I will say, you always get very personal about stuff like that. I will say I was good and grown, as they say, when that episode came out. But being raised a black man in Texas, had I been 12, I would have caught the Sisko and Bashir thing because I dealt with that stuff growing up. I grew up being followed I grew up being followed in grocery stores. I grew up being followed in stores by security. When I had graduated from college with a degree in electrical engineering, my friend and I, who was a Mexican, who had a master's in electrical engineering, and another friend who was a really brilliant artist, black, and my oldest friend in life, we went into a jewelry store in a really upscale part of Dallas, dressed with khakis and stuff. And the kids in there who were white called the cops on us just for walking in. And that has been part of my life. I mean, it's just a thing. So I can relate to that. But at the same time, Charles, as you said, I have a wife who although she's black, she's a small woman. And sometimes she will get that, oh, you poor thing, what's wrong with you, kind of thing too. So you bring all kinds of prejudices to it.
Sure.
And one thing I like about the Star Trek, and I like about Star Trek in general, is I've always felt this. I've grown up around white people my whole life. And when I was a kid, I had friends who'd ask me all kinds of crazy questions about what it is to be black. And I always told them this: you can ask me anything as long as you have an open mind and you listen to my answer. Right. The moment you stereotype me, I'm not having a conversation with you. So I love this episode of Star Trek because I want Star Trek to show prejudice. Yeah. And honestly, if that's prejudice against LGBTQ, the disabled, I want to see that because I want to see them overcome it. And one of the reasons I love Captain Kirk to this day so much is Kirk had prejudices and biases in him. And the original series is always about Kirk recognizing that and overcoming it, not being perfect. That's what I love about Star Trek.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, looking back at the episode too, I think one of the things that really struck me watching it this time is like the people who were working in the sanctuary district who weren't even necessarily like they're not evil people. Right. They're just people with these like low paying jobs who maybe got a job there because they thought they were doing a good thing. And now they're just overworked and stressed and they're just stuck in this situation in a different way than the folks in the sanctuary district are. But like the lady working at the desk and the guards, and you get the older guard who's more jaded and the younger guard who you feel like maybe he could have got into it for idealistic reasons, but he's got a wife and kid at home and they're all just sort of part of this system, whether they choose to be or not.
Right. It's a fascinating thing to look at.
Yeah, and I forget the actor's name, but the actor you're talking about who played the older guard, he also played in the TV series Fame, and he ran, I think, like a diner or something that was near the School for Performing Arts. The reason I bring him up is in that show, he was that father figure type, the good guy who always gave people advice and stuff like that. And to what you're saying, when you look at him in the show, you can tell he's not a bad guy. He's not a hateful guy or anything like that. I mean, he seems like he's a really nice guy, but he's been in that job for so long. And like you said, he's just jaded. I've heard this. I know we've all heard this. I've had friends and family who've been social workers, who've worked in the emergency room and hospital, who've been cops and prison guards. And what happens, I don't care who you are, when you do jobs like that for a long time, you start getting jaded about humanity. And you have to do something to get yourself out of that. You have to. I don't care how good your heart was. When you see enough men beat their wives, and you see enough people ruin themselves by taking drugs, when you see enough gunshot wounds on Friday and Saturday night at the hospital, you start getting a really negative attitude about humanity. And that's if you're black or white. Right. And you have to do something to pull yourself out of that, because you, like I said, you become jaded. You don't even mean it. You're just there. And then you think your job sucks. Like he probably hasn't gotten a raise in 5 years or something like that.
Probably.
Right.
You know, how many times he's been cut, bitten, spat upon, stabbed, and he's like, why do I do this? You ought to be grateful. And then next thing you know, you've changed.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And the actor's name is Dick Miller, and he's been in a phenomenal amount of things. I mean, as a kid, I knew him from Gremlins, but he's been in so many things before and after this. And I mean, there's a really great cast in this episode. Even the guy who played BC, who was one of the ghosts in the episode, you know, he was sort of like the main one you see who's sort of out of control. Very small acting career, but I thought he was really good and really effective in that part in this episode.
Yeah.
Right.
And I just want to kind of talk about the thing that Keith just mentioned. You know, both of you were talking about these characters who get jaded, and you know, it's not even necessarily seeing all that negativity and it affecting you. It's more like it's a self-protective thing, you know, because you're in that situation and it's a hard situation to deal with. And yes, you do get jaded, but you also you pull away from it because you have to have some kind of separation to deal with it on a daily basis, to deal with it constantly.
Right. You know,
so part of that is just, you know, surviving in that situation.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I thought
we all do it.
Sure.
Go ahead, Charles.
No, you go ahead.
I've been talking for a while, so you know, I'm good.
I was just gonna say, I thought the lady who played like the one who was like keying them in, I thought she was really effective as well. She seemed like the kind of person that you would meet at really any social, you know, services type scenario, or like the DMV or wherever. A lady who's just sort of worn out from the job and just has to come to work every day.
Yeah, and she's like, I know this sucks. Sorry. Go do this. That's what you gotta do. That's all there is. Sorry, go away.
Yeah, and we've all been there when we had to go get our new driver's license or a tag, and something's not quite right, and you want some sympathy, and they just kind of look at you, and you know, you'll do the thing. Can I get on the line? Sure. Take a number, get back in line, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I also, am moving over into like the folks who were in the sanctuary district as well. I thought that the guy, and I don't have his name right in front of me, but I thought that the one they sort of befriend, like they find his friend or his son or whoever is injured, and he's just like this working class guy, and he's like, you know, they say they were supposed to be able to get jobs, but I haven't been on a job interview in a while, and he's just like this ordinary guy who's just trapped in this system now. And I mean, it just really, I mean, you have like the people who are hyped up and beating people up and starting riots and stuff. And then you have like this regular guy who you feel like should be working at a bank or something. And he's just in there. And I think that that's just a really great example of just folks who just sort of fall victim to the system and can't get back a leg up. You know what I mean? But are otherwise perfectly capable.
Yeah. When we had our, Great Recession back in 2008, 2009, that happened to a lot of people. A lot of people lost homes. Businesses. Businesses fell. People who had been living a comfortably middle-class life all of a sudden weren't. People had trouble paying their bills. I was laid off during that time, and it was a horrible time. I went months not sleeping. I would go to sleep at 4 o'clock the next morning. It's actually when I did my Voyager rewatch, because I needed something in the middle of the night, so I couldn't sit there and freak out for the fact I didn't have the job. And that's when I did my Voyager rewatch. And if you even look at American history, if you go back to the 1920s, the Great Depression.
Oh yeah.
The thing that's always talked about with the Great Depression is two things. There was a thing about businessmen supposedly jumping out of windows when they were bankrupted in a single day. And the other thing, there's a whole thing about apples, because there was a whole thing about people selling apples to make money. And so you even watch things like Charlie Chaplin or other movies from that time, and there'd be some really guy who you can tell used to be rich trying to sell apples because that's what people were trying to do. And you had rich Wall Street businessmen sleeping in tent cities in Central Park back then because they had nothing and nothing else to do. And so it's kind of one of those things where anybody can end up that way. And that goes back to not thinking that because people look a certain way or because they have certain mental or physical disabilities that, they just did it to themselves. You know, I hate to use a word that's kind of common in somebody's lingo right now, but you think they're losers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, even in my own life, like I know that, like say if something like I lost my job, or Uncle lost her job, we lost the house, I could go live with my mom.
Yeah.
I could go live with my sister, my brother. I've got a few friends who I'm close enough to that I could go live with. But there are certainly
Mhm.
folks who don't have a living relative or
Yeah.
a close friend like that. That I mean, you're a month's wages away from being on the street. You know,
Right.
Right.
That
Especially
is
if you
that
get
is
hit with, Go
that
ahead.
is my biggest fear
Mm.
of ending
Yeah.
up homeless. And I literally, like, every place anytime I go to a new area or something, I look around
Mhm.
and I think that's a place that I could go and sleep and be safe and not be, harassed by people, if I had nowhere else to go, like behind a bush or under a bridge or something like that. I mean, and I literally do. I literally thought it yesterday morning.
Mm.
So,
Wow.
it is my biggest fear.
You can stay here, Alan.
You're the best. Aw.
And I want to, since we're being very blunt, I want to point out something. Alan just said that, and Alan's white. So it's not just, it's not just somebody with mental disabilities. It's not somebody with physical disabilities. It's not like the movies, unfortunately, did for a while. Every Vietnam veteran came back crazy and dangerous and was homeless. It's not because you're Black or Mexican or anything like that. Anybody can have those fears. And a lot of things, like Alan and I are kind of the same age, and that Alan and I have parents and grandparents who, my late parents were born during the Great Depression. So Alan, your family is probably kind of sort of like mine. My parents and my grandparents, brother, if you did not try to prepare yourself for the worst happening, you better save that money. You better know how to take care of yourself, as you said, in case something crazy happened. Because my parents and grandparents told me, don't you ever think that you're safe from something like that happening to you. That was the world they were raised in, and you just better be prepared.
You're one step away from a sanctuary city.
Well, and just realistically, most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Where if Friday's paycheck didn't arrive, a lot of folks don't have a safety net and a backup plan just because of the way the system is. You know what I mean? So I think it's something that folks should think a lot about more and have more sympathy for, because you're not that big a catastrophe away from losing what you have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And not to turn this into a self-therapy session, but as we're talking about these days, as the cast here probably knows, 2 years ago, I came really close to dying. I was like 2 hours from being dead. And I was in the hospital for a week, and then I had to have surgery several weeks later. And years ago, I saw a Mad Magazine cartoon that was funny. Long story short, it was about a guy who had a heart attack, and they show all this stuff, and he got healed, and he goes home, and his heart's beating, and he opens his mail, and he drops dead of a heart attack because he got his bill. Now, for what you said earlier, Charles, I had insurance for my wife, and she was working. I have insurance on my company, insurance paid. But still, when I got the bills after my emergency room stay and surgery, I was like, holy crap. Now I can get it paid because of insurance. And I have an option for things like payment plans. But so many people in this country get wrecked by one bad health event. And had I not had a good job in insurance, honestly, we could have lost everything, because it was huge. And I was like, what the hell? I know it was bad, but oh my God, that much money to bring me back to life, basically. And but that
worth that much.
Yes, right. And that can and has ruined so many people. Just that one thing.
Yeah, my daughter for several years had an ongoing medical situation that would put her into a facility for literally like a month or a month and a half on end. Wow. And occasionally I would get that bill in the mail, and I would have a conversation with her mother, like, you're sure I don't owe this amount of money? Because I'm thinking, like, do I have to change my name?
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
I also thought
this is a heavy topic, so I think it's appropriate though that we pay the respect that it's due, because this is something that was on their minds as of season 3 of Deep Space Nine. Like I said, I said before, I was like 12 or 13 or 13 or 14 when this episode came out. And the situation in America hasn't changed since then. And I think that's the thing. I would love to be able to watch this and think like, oh, this is so far-fetched and old-fashioned. Yeah. You know what I mean? And not like, ooh, I wonder if that's going to happen. You know?
Right.
You're like, hey, that's currently happening.
And we've had politicians who I could see running on a platform of sanctuary cities and getting support for it.
Right now.
So it's not something that's outside the realm of possibility even going forward.
Right. I completely agree. One other thing I loved about the episode is of season 3, and Dr. Bashir's character was still evolving. You know, as you know, from the first season, I've been watching so many British shows. From the first season, he was you know, this callow, arrogant guy, always trying to ridiculously flirt with Dax, you know, trying to get with his patient Melora. I mean, he was doing all kinds of weird stuff, getting on people's nerves. And I think this is one of the episodes, but at the same time, he was a healer. And I think this is one of those episodes that if you want to say this, it started also maturing his character. Right. Because much more than Sisko, both because he's younger and they've established Sisko's character because of Avery Brooks was much more connected to being a black man and understanding what black people used to suffer than you would think somebody in his time period would be. But Sisko, being older and more experienced, was able to look at this with much more cynicism, whereas Bashir at first was stunned. Stunned, you know, from a world where he can wave a light over your forehead and heal a cut to a world where people don't even want to give you like bandage or a sandwich to eat. And I love that because I think that really got to Bashir. You can see it. He's shocked.
And they really had some really great interactions about that in this episode where, I mean, Bashir was saying like, you know, like Sisko was saying something along the lines, well, back then, and Sisko's like, no, Bashir was like, even in this time, they could cure schizophrenia. They could treat this. Like the things that these are wrong with these folks, they could have gotten treatment if the society had wanted to provide that to them. And I mean, and Sisko made the point that it's like, no, they lived with this problem for so long that they were sort of worn down by it and numb to it until they woke up to it later on. But I think that's basically turning to the camera and talking to the audience, you know, but about something that I think is real because so many folks, I mean, how many times do you drive past, you know, folks on the side of the road? How many times
every day
do you say, sorry, I don't have any change?
Yeah.
And keep walking. I mean,
I don't carry cash.
It becomes routine.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also thought that, to your point, Charles, it could have almost become like an after school special or you see Timmy moments, but because they wrote it so well, and I think you had Bashir, Alexander Siddig or Siddig Al-Fadil, I think he was still going by then, they acted it so well. And also on the flip side, what I thought was an interesting contrast was Dax, the oldest of all of them, kind of quickly aware of the fortune that she fell into. And she is looking around going, isn't this interesting? Look how nice you are to me. Look how clean you guys are. And then the guy she gets with is, he could kind of sort of be considered like the well-meaning liberal, kind of sort of. And I just love that. And like I said, then she's like, oh, hey, you want to go to a party with all these beautiful people? And she's instantly looking around. And some people would just go, oh, hey, okay, I hope Ben and Julian are okay. I'm stuck in the past. I'm going to have a good life. See you later.
Right. One thing that made me laugh though, he was asking about her tattoos, and we just had someone with Dax tattoos on like a week earlier, Leo from the Trek track. So I thought that was kind of cute. But I think that you're right that this story never stops working as a drama throughout. You know what I mean? Even though they're dealing very directly with real world societal problems, and I mean addressing them pretty much head on as much as you could in 1990s television, but I think it works throughout. You stay engaged with the characters and what they're going through, and I mean it's certainly convenient that Sisko has to step in to keep history going, but I think it's effective.
The other thing that I find really interesting about this, and I think it's a bold move, is to dedicate 2 episodes to this story. They could have easily have done this as a single episode thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But the fact that they dedicated 2 weeks out of their broadcast year to tell this story, I think says a lot about the importance of the story, a lot about the mindset of the people who made it. And I think it's just remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. And it looks fantastic all the way through, like the production values and scale of it for a 2-part TV episode in the 90s.
Right.
I mean, they're filming on the back lot, but I mean, they've got some big crowd scenes. They've got a very well established and sort of consistent future, you know, a sort of RoboCopy that it's like a near future with their own computers and styles and that's sort of outside of the regular Star Trek look. I thought that it's almost film quality in what they were accomplishing in these episodes. I think it just throughout it just looks great.
Yeah. Agreed.
And it's really well shot. You get a lot of like overheads and crowd shots, and there's times when like people start rioting and losing control that it really is like frightening to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been around those places very recently, as a matter of fact. So it can be, scary. I've had
Mm.
people close to me who've been homeless, and I've had to go help. And then it's weird because at the same time, you don't want to feel that way. There are times you need to be careful. I've gone down to 10 o'clock at night to take some money to somebody who was living under a bridge, and the person himself told me, "Be careful, you might get stabbed out here." So it's a weird thing to manage, because I drive to work at 6:30 in the morning every day. Well, not every day, several days a week when I go downtown Atlanta. And just yesterday morning at 6:20 in the morning, a guy comes up to the window and wants me to roll it down to give him some money. And I'm not a scary guy, but that's not probably a good idea to do something. It doesn't mean he's going to try to hurt me, but you don't know. And then you don't ever want to get to the point where you just start fearing something like that. Yeah. I'm going to tell this is a really personal story about how you think about homeless people. That the show years ago, I was downtown walking around, and the guy was selling me a newspaper, some homeless guy. And he said, "Sir, can you spare some money or something like that?" And I said, "Sure." So I pulled out, I had a 10, so I gave him a 10. And he said, "Thank you." And I felt good. But I caught myself because I was expecting him to lose it and thank me and praise me and bless me with Jesus and say, "Oh, thank you so much." And he just said, "Thank you. I appreciate it." And I realized I was looking for more gratitude from him. And then I was like, dude, wait a minute. Why are you expecting the guy to fall on his feet and praise you? He still has dignity. He said, "Thank you. What else did I need?" But I was expecting something different. And that made me look at myself for just a second. Because you got to be very careful to look at people like that. I don't ever want to, and I'm not that guy, but I don't ever want to get to the point where I feel like I'm up here and like, "You poor, sad, savage person, I just helped you out."
Right.
It taught me a lesson right then and there.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's worth noting in these episodes that episode 2 was directed by Jonathan Frakes. We comment on Frakes episodes because they're always great. I don't know if they just like Frakes and gives them the great scripts, or if he just makes magic out of these things. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, but it's fantastic that it seems like every time I'm watching a great Star Trek episode, it's like directed by Jonathan Frakes. So like, of course it is.
Yeah, he's a good one.
Yeah. Well, to turn it into a slightly nerdier direction for a second, for a break, I've got a nerd Trek question about this episode for you. Okay. So just recently on Prodigy, they were talking about predestination paradoxes.
Oh,
and the Bell Riots. So was the Bell Riot always Sisko, or did they alter history and the real Gabriel Bell died, of course, as we saw in the episode, and Sisko had to sort of like improvise and keep history going? Or was that Gabriel Bell of the Bell Riots always Sisko? What do you think?
Always Sisko.
Okay.
But the real Gabriel Bell was there.
He was there, but would that Gabriel Bell have even done what Sisko did? Is my point. Like, if that Gabriel Bell had lived, or was it the history as he knew it of the Star Trek universe always Sisko taking over that role of Gabriel Bell during the Bell Riots?
I think it's always history, because when you go back and step into it, you become it.
Okay.
So you think Sisko was always meant to do it? I kind of think Bell would have stepped up, but you made me think of something I never thought of, because seeing Bell killed in front of him and kind of fully responsible made Sisko step up.
Right.
So to your point, would Bell have stepped up in that level of seriousness had he not had that? I never thought about that before. What a great point.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because I'd never really thought of it. I always sort of thought of it as the historical Gabriel Bell died. Like if you went back in time and George Washington died, and then you change your name to George Washington and do what George Washington did, right? But the Sisko had kind of improvised to keep history on track. But then they threw that out as a predestination paradox on Prodigy, and I was like, was it always Sisko? I never thought about it that way.
Right. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
The time travel stuff gets weird. Marvel Comics, I don't do the movies as much. Marvel Comics has exactly what you said, Charles. Marvel Comics and Prodigy did the same thing. They always say that you can kind of change time, but there are these anchor points in history of the universe that must always take place the way they take place.
Right.
Yep.
You can do all time in Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. So the same thing. Another thing I thought was fascinating about Albert Bell, which I absolutely love. I'm not going to spoil much, but later on with Deep Space Nine, Dumar, I'll just leave it there. It does something very similar. What I love about Albert Bell is he doesn't lead a revolution. He doesn't spend years fighting.
Gabriel Bell.
Gabriel Bell. He doesn't spend years fighting a revolution. He basically gives like one speech and kind of inspires people. And I kind of love the power of that because Sisko obviously didn't hang around and the original guy was dead. But it's kind of cool and interesting sometimes where one voice, even for a moment, can kind of spark something. And then people build on that.
Yeah.
Because to your point, if the original Bell had lived, we don't know if he would have been fighting the system for years, if he would have been allowed to. They might have knocked him in the head and thrown him in jail. And you would have heard from him again.
Right.
Or you might have gone, hey, there's a riot. I'm getting out of here.
Exactly. Right.
True.
Yeah.
But just that moment, that was a day or something where everybody did the TV interviews.
Yeah.
That point in time started it.
Yeah, I thought it was their use of the net throughout these episodes. I think
they
weren't quite sure what the net would be in 30 years.
Yes.
But
Pretty darn close.
They referenced the net a lot and the fact that things are playing on the net. They didn't have quite the live streaming terminology down, but I thought it worked very well. I don't think it feels that unusual. They have real chunky computers compared to what we have, but I thought they did a good job of, because it would be. I mean, now it'd be somebody with the phone out and they'd be live streaming, telling their story, and that's really something that's been the social media era of people connecting to one another and organizing and really getting their stories out has really been something that's really increased as we've had the level of technology and connectivity that we've had now. So I thought that was really that was the way that they sort of got their story out to the world. I thought was very effective. But like you said too, just going back to that real quick, that was something that struck me again watching it as well. That Gabriel Bell's contribution wasn't, because you think of the Bell Riots like he's the leader of the riots, and he wasn't. He didn't start the riots. He wasn't he was the guy making sure they didn't kill the hostages.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that was really Gabriel Bell's contribution, was making sure that BC guy didn't start shooting people, because then they would have stormed it and it would have been over, instead of getting their story out and showing that these are not monsters. These are not, people who we should be shooting. These are just regular people who are in a bad situation. Yeah.
I also think that, to reinforce the predestination paradox, but Dax's contribution to the one tech guy and her talking to him, because he was all like, yeah, this is where they go and they're safe and they have a safe place to sleep and they help get a job. But she helped convince him otherwise. And I think having someone like that being convinced on the outside, not necessarily by the people that were in the district, but by someone else, probably helped the situation as well, I think. So he could step in and do something.
Yeah.
He had the resources to step in and do something.
Right. And he could and would hear Dax where he couldn't and wouldn't hear other people. So
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. He was the other person I thought who there was the whole weird bit of humor thing where Kira and O'Brien kept jumping to different times. They kept seeing all these weird people, and of course they somehow dumped right into the hippie thing. They kind of did it. It was kind of strange, and of course Kira, not being a human, thought some of it was weird. But I always thought if there was anybody else who could have been there on Earth with Sisko and dealt with it, it was Kira, because she has just come from an occupation. She knows what it is to be poor. She knows what it is to be hungry. She knows what it is to be oppressed. She would have got it. And she might have said something like, gosh, I didn't know your planet was this bad, as relatively recent in your history as it is. But it wouldn't have stunned her so much past that. I think she probably would have been able to deal with it better than Bashir.
Probably, but I think having Bashir there was very effective, because Bashir, especially early on, was very naive, and so someone from the future saying like, "Are you got to be kidding me that humanity was like this 300 years ago? I can't believe this. This is shocking."
Yes.
But I think that's exactly why Kira wasn't there,
right?
Because having a character that can deal with that and understand it and adapt to it is not the same story,
right?
Kira's
like, my people had it worse. You guys are amateurs.
Right.
Yeah, she probably would have hit the billionaire guy. He probably would have pissed her off. She probably would have socked him for
she would have punked Dick Miller right off.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Charles, you mentioned their use of the net. I do think that was what was what was very interesting was just for a moment making people sit and listen to you, just telling people stories. And sometimes that's all it is, because like you say, so many of us, we just drive by, walk by, avert our gaze. If you just listen to people, sometimes you go, oh, that could have been me, or that was my cousin, or something like that. And I just love that whole point, because sometimes you just listen to people, and when you feel like, oh, they're just useless, or they're losers, or they want to be that way, and you listen to their story, and sometimes you just realize that just because someone isn't as strong as you were doesn't mean they're weak. Those are two different things. Like you said, if something happened to me today, I have two brothers I could live with. I could do that. I could make it work. I've been working in IT long enough where I can get a lower level job that pays less than I make, but can keep me alive. Completely different thing. I have a job where I don't have to get a job where I have to drive in, because I do certain types of IT. So I could work from home permanently if I found the right job. That doesn't make me better than anyone. It just means that I've been more fortunate. And we forget that sometimes.
Absolutely. And if I could interject just another nerdy comment real quick. Just because sometimes nerdy things strike you as well, right? Like if your transporter beam does not materialize on Earth, Starfleet is useless. They were no help whatsoever. Oh, they're not here.
Sorry.
Oh, I know. Wasn't that great?
Command. Where's the search parties? It's Commander Sisko.
I'm forgetting exactly what. Did they ever tell what the cause was of this whole thing?
Yeah, the ship had built up from using the cloaking device. The ship had built up extra chronoton particles on the hull, and then the transporter beam went through the chronoton particles back in time. Right, but then somehow they were still connected, because once they changed history, the future disappeared, but it didn't disappear right away. Like all of a sudden, they lost contact with Starfleet Command. Once, like I think it was around the time that Gabriel Bell died, right? Because now the history has changed. So don't spend too much time on it.
That actually, so that supports that it was not a predestination paradox.
Until Sisko started doing what he's supposed to do. So I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
Wesley Crusher didn't turn up to explain it.
Right. Yeah. What was funny is slight spoiler for those who are listening, for the DS9 episode Little Green Men, which also is, of course, a time travel episode. When Nog is going to Earth, he's given a book of Earth history. And there's that great line where he's reading about the Bell Riots. He goes, I was reading about Gabriel Bell. He looks like Commander Sisko. And it was just great, because history is reset. It is Sisko's picture in the book. And I always wondered, anybody in Starfleet Academy, when they're teaching history, did they ever talk about the Bell Riots and go, holy crap, this guy looks just like that Sisko guy.
Right.
Do you think that the temporal investigation guys would have shown up at some point being like, all right, Gabriel Bell, what's you have to say for yourself?
Those guys, I forgot about them. That's funny. Right. Heck, Sisko himself could have gone back
in this episode, did they?
No, they didn't. They weren't.
No,
they weren't.
That's right. Yeah,
that's
right.
But no, I think this episode really holds up. There, like I said, there are certain things like the big chunky computers and the fashions that don't quite work. But I mean, so it's not like a prediction of the future, but I think it holds up as far as just a piece of drama, as well as like a social allegory, because unfortunately it's still just as relevant now as it was then.
Yeah. Right. But talking about the chunky computers, I think that anybody who is setting up a sanctuary city is not going to equip it with the best stuff.
True.
So, I think that they get the crappy older computers. So I don't know. To me, it still kind of works.
Yeah, but Buddy still had it in his condo where Dax was. So, but, I get it. I'm not criticizing the episode. I'm just saying that it's not quite a prediction of 2024, but I think it works very well. And I think they smartly referenced it in Picard season 2, but I wish they would have gone deeper into that sort of realm in Picard season 2 than they did. Aside from just putting up Sanctuary District signs in the background, although I do appreciate that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, does anyone have any final thoughts on it before we wrap this thing up?
Good episode.
Good episode.
Yeah, one thing, as I mentioned before, it's funny because I spent a lot of time reading social media about Star Trek, Facebook groups and stuff. And it's amazing how many people online will say, "Can we please not talk about anything serious? Can we just have fun and enjoy Star Trek?" And it stuns me every time I read it. There's so many people who don't want to talk about sexism and racism and war and politics in the Star Trek world. That's what it was about. The whole point of Star Trek was that if we don't watch it, we're going to continue to be barbarians who use and hate and oppress each other. And Gene Roddenberry and Shatner and them in that original series was not about us being perfect. It was we were all too flawed, and we just need to recognize it and work past it. And this episode reminds us, it shows us literally the best and the worst of humanity. And I think that's what Star Trek does.
Yeah.
Well
Agreed.
said.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Keith, where can people find more of you?
You can find me on X and Facebook, primarily the ESO Network Facebook groups.
And how about you, Alan?
Okay, you can head on over to cosmiccreative.com. That's spelled with a K and a Z for some dumb reason. Cosmic, that is. And you can check out some of the books that I've written and published by other authors, and 2 other podcasts that I do, one of which is Doctor Who A to Z. We just did a great episode about our favorite non-televised companions. Really good. And then I also have another show called Modern Musicology, where we talk about all kinds of music topics, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and a little bit newer stuff than that.
Awesome. And Evelyn Smythe is on there, right? On your discussion.
Evelyn.
Is it Evelyn Smythe? Is she
It
on
is. Yeah. Oh, of course.
Good. Okay.
Oh,
good.
she's the greatest.
Oh, good. I'll listen then. If she wasn't on there, I wasn't going to listen.
Okay, good.
All right, Veronica, where can people find more of us?
Feltnery.com.
And?
Monkeying Around, a podcast about the monkeys.
Yep. And if you're at Dragon Con this weekend, come find all of us. Search for our names in the app. Search for Felt Nerdy in the app or any of our individual names. And come find us. We're all over the place at Dragon Con, and we would love to see you. And come up to us and say you listen to Earth Station Trek, because we would love to meet you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Veronica, do you have a closing for us this week?
Nope.
Okay.
Fair enough.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Take care, y'all.
Thanks.